Here is one way that you can find joy in your storm. We all go through storms in our lives, and it's not just something that happens to us today. It even was things that happened to people in biblical times, like the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul faced a lot of difficulties in his life, and especially when you look at the book of Philippians, Paul, at this moment, he's imprisoned because he's been sharing the gospel. He's in house arrest. He's struggling to find food. He's struggling to find warm clothing and that kind of stuff. He really is even struggling to find people who can support him. And so Paul is going through a storm in his life. Yet in the book of Philippians, one of the themes is that despite what Paul is going through, he has found joy. And so we can read it and be like, Paul, how could you find joy in such a terrible circumstance? And learn then from that how we can find joy in our own circumstance. And in Philippians chapter 1, Paul tells us that one of the ways we can find joy is if we see it as an opportunity for Jesus. In fact, he has just said previously, up until verses 14, that one of the things that storms can do is it can open up doors for us to share the gospel with people who otherwise either never would have had a chance to hear it or wouldn't even care to have listened. But because of that storm, now they can hear and now they can care. And that's what happened to Paul. But then in verse 14 through 18, he gives this other way, this other door that's opened by storms to give us an opportunity then to share Christ and spread Christ to people that otherwise would have been shut if we hadn't had a storm. And that is that storms open the door for us to encourage believers in their own walk with Christ and encourage believers also to use their story to then share Christ with other people. So Paul says in verses 14 of chapter 1, "And most of the brothers and sisters, trusting in the Lord because of my imprisonment, have far more courage to speak the word of God without fear. Some, to be sure, preaching Christ even from envy and strife, but some also from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am appointed for the defense of the gospel, and the former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, rather than from pure motives, thinking to cause me distress in my imprisonment. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in this I rejoice. Yes, I will rejoice." So in verse 14, Paul says, hey, I'm rejoicing because the believers in Rome, they're seeing Paul. Paul says they're watching what I'm going through. They're watching how I'm responding to this difficult time in my life. And my response to this difficult time is actually encouraging other believers. They have more boldness to talk to other people about Jesus. They have more boldness to face their own fears. They have more boldness to tell their own stories to people and use their own stories for people to talk about Jesus and to spread his glory. So in other words, Paul is saying, because I'm going through a storm, other believers have been strengthened in their own relationship with Christ and encouraged to talk to other people about Jesus too. Now he admits in 15 through 17, he goes through a short digression where he admits that not everybody who is sharing the gospel in the city is doing it from pure motives. Some people have impure motives with it. But Paul's conclusion ultimately in verse 18 is that because people are seeing the way he's responded to storms, Christ is being proclaimed more, lost people are being saved, believers are being strengthened, and in that, Paul can find joy. He says there's a ray of sunshine shooting through the clouds, and it's the knowledge of knowing that Christ is being proclaimed more and more because of his storm. So what do we do about this? Well, first, we need to accept Christ for ourselves, knowing that he is the source of joy and he's the one that brings joy to us. You can't find joy in speaking to other people about Jesus unless you first accept Jesus for yourself. He is the source of joy. But then, secondly, you need to ask yourself the question, who has God put in your life that you can encourage with your story? Encourage closer to Christ with your story. In fact, if you're glad that God can use your story to encourage other people, hit that like button. You see, Paul's point is important because he's saying, despite what we normally feel when we have difficult times, we want to hole into a place and get away from people and not talk about stuff and not talk about things and what's going on. Paul says that's not where joy comes from. Joy comes from actually taking what we're going through, taking our story, and using that to encourage other believers who have similar stories. He says joy doesn't come from sitting on the couch watching SportsCenter on Sunday morning. It comes from being around other believers and using your storm as an opportunity to grow them closer to Jesus. Not just yourself, but other people. And so, who in your life can you use your storm to encourage them in Jesus and encourage them to talk to other people about Jesus? The thing is, Paul is saying it's your choice. You have to choose how you are going to respond. This is how Paul responded. Now, what about you? Like I said, if you're glad that God can shoot the ray of light into the storm and he can use your storm to encourage other people, hit that like button. And if you want to learn more about how Jesus can bring joy in your life, talk to me, comment below, or message me. I'd love to talk to you about that.